All right, we'll get started then. All right, I'm Jared Berkeyheiser, Chief of Police with the City of Lancaster. I'm here with Craig Stedman, District Attorney of the County of Lancaster, along with Captain Winters from our Criminal Investigative Division and 2 Assistant District Attorneys from the District Attorney's Office. And I'll let Craig introduce them. So the reason we're meeting here, I want to first thank you for being here and allowing us to get this information out to the public. So over the past few weeks, we've seen an increase in violence in our neighborhoods that should concern every resident of the city. Our officers have made significant progress in each of these investigations, but we are still lacking some information to bring these cases to a closure. In each of these, there's been a considerable amount of help from the business community and residents with providing video and other evidence for these cases, but we need more to build the best possible case that we can take to court and make arrests. Community cooperation is vital to our crime prevention efforts and the success in the investigations, which goes a long way to ensure stronger and safer neighborhoods in the city of Lancaster. We know that in each of these cases, there are additional witnesses who are either reluctant to come forward due to an allegiance or perceived allegiance to the suspects, or there is a fear of retaliation. Right now, we have several families grieving the loss of loved ones, a loss that is indescribable. Anonymous tips are helpful and can help direct an investigation, but we also need witnesses who are willing to provide their names and information. Being silent allows the lawlessness to continue and for the suspects to further terrorize our neighborhoods. Historically, we had and continue to have shootings or other violent assaults where the actual victims refuse to cooperate with the investigation, which is extremely frustrating from the investigative standpoint and to our officers, especially when a victim was shot or stabbed several times and they don't want to cooperate with the investigation. Our detectives spend several hours investigating these crimes, even when victims are unwilling to cooperate, because we know the cycle of violence will probably continue. This is not a civilized way to live and exposes innocent people to potential injury or loss of life when people or groups of people are willing to engage in violence in our neighborhoods. If these individuals do not value or understand the sanctity of human life, then we as a community need to hold them accountable and bring them to justice. I'll turn it over to Craig for additional comments.
Thanks, Chief. Good morning. So with me is First Assistant Travis Anderson and Assistant District Attorney Jen Panassa, who are working on these cases from our office. The goal of today is just to give you an update as to where we're at on these cases, these important cases, and to make an appeal to the public. And we need the media's help for that. What we're going to do after this conference actually is we're going to have a detective from my office, a Spanish-speaking detective. I mean, it's a fact that the city has a number of Spanish-speaking people, and we're going to basically redo this again and put that out on social media to make an appeal for information, because as the chief said, we can't solve these cases without witnesses who are willing to come into court. And I think it's important to recognize the significant cooperation that we've received from businesses, from people associated with the victims, from the victims' families, and neighbors that we've gotten. But we also need to look at the other aspect of things, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I think a couple things I want to point out in regard to all 3 of these homicides. They're not random. All the people, they either encountered each other beforehand or they are absolutely known to each other, the individuals involved. None of them are related. There's no relationship between them. All of them would appear, in the information we have, to be based on essentially absurd reasons. Really no reason whatsoever for any of these, but the information that we have at this point is this is absolutely ridiculous. It makes it even worse. I think it's important for the public to understand that we essentially have 3 different categories of cases. We have the ones where we know what happened and where we can prove what happened. We have the ones where we know what happened, but we can't prove it because we don't have the witnesses or the forensic evidence. And then there's the ones we just don't know. And there's obviously we're not making any arrests today, but I can say that the city police has done an outstanding job working on all these cases tirelessly. They're great at what they do, and we're working closely with them. And I, as the DA, am more than satisfied with the progress they've made. We can't share the progress we've made. But again, I want to emphasize that we can't arrest anybody until we have somebody that's willing to go to court that's going to hold up. As the chief mentioned, we've gotten a lot of tips from these cases, and some in the Chestnut Street. We get a great number of tips, and tips are valuable, but anonymous tips we can't take to court. So if we have 100 people telling us anonymously that Mr. X committed this crime, that may help us lead it into a direction, and may help and does help the investigation. But there's nothing we can actually take an active role, well, we can't do anything with that. We can't charge based on anonymous tips. I think it's important that I can tell you that the police made significant progress in each of these 3 cases early on. They had a good picture as to what had happened, who was involved, and the evidence they developed. And we have persons of interest in each one of the cases, and they had that fairly early on. A couple specific things that I would say regarding the Chestnut Street case, Mr. Gardner, that we did release the one video looking for, we have a person of interest, and we want to emphasize that. Again, the information we have is that people were absolutely known to each other. Regarding the Lafayette Street, Mr. Marshall, one thing that I would say specifically is we know there are a number of people on the street at the time that saw this, or would have seen them clearly running from the shooting at the time, and they have not come forward. And that's a challenge to us. With the stabbing, I think it's actually a little bit more discouraging, in the sense that there were quite a number of people. The individuals involved were, and the suspect, we know there are people that know who the suspect is, personally known to them, not only have been reluctant, again, the victims' side and the friends of the victims and the neighbors have been great and cooperative, but the other side of things, not only did not have been reluctant, but a couple of them have actually obtained attorneys and have refused to discuss the case with us. They're entitled to do that. They're legally able to do that, but that presents great problems for the police, and of course even greater problems to the community. The other thing I think we'd be remiss in not mentioning here, because it's all tied together, is there's been a number of non-fatal acts of violence this year in the city, and the city has encountered in some of those where the victims, actually, not only witnesses, but the victims themselves have refused to cooperate with the police. And the effect of that is, not only do we not make that arrest and not bring a dangerous person off the streets, but it perpetuates the cycle of violence, because those victims can be re-victimized, or they want to take things into their own hands, and it just goes on and on and on. And people need to step up and decide what kind of community they want to live in. Silence, reluctance to cooperate with the police absolutely literally allows killers to remain in your neighborhood. You have to make a decision as to what kind of neighborhood you want to live in. You want to strengthen your community, you want it safe for you and yours, then you need an open line of communication to the police, and you need to talk to them. There's just no question about it. The community's safer when people are cooperating with the police. You have to have accountability. It's just the right thing to do. And of course, we hope people understand that you're protecting yourself and you're protecting your own by coming forward. The alternative is people can commit acts of violence like this, murders, and go back into the community and live there. And now they've gotten away with it once in their minds. What message are you sending to that individual to take out further violence over something nonsensical and something, quite frankly, that's absolutely stupid? And to take a life over it once, okay, but now to be able to not be held accountable for that, you're emboldening them to do it again and do it again. I do want to emphasize, to my left, there are another Crime Watch Pennsylvania and Crime Stoppers for tips. You can also call the police directly. I do want to thank Janet Diaz from City Council, who actually suggested having a Spanish interpreter here, which we'll do shortly thereafter. But I just want to end, and then we'll take questions and understand there may be some things we just can't tell you as far as questions. Either we don't know or we do know, and it might compromise the investigation, so we'll just have to take them one at a time. But I want to note again, as the chief pointed out, that these aren't numbers. You talk about 3 murders. They're not 1, 2, and 3. They're people. They had their lives ahead of them. They had the right to live their lives going forward. It ended suddenly and violently at the hands of other individuals who have not yet been held accountable. We need cooperation from the community. We know there are people who know what happened in each one of these cases sitting out there right now who we have either not talked to, or they've not come forward, or they've told us less than than what they know. And that's difficult to swallow from a law enforcement perspective, but even beyond that, for the family members that go on, and for the person whose life is lost, that needs to change. These were real people. This is not a TV show. These families are grieving. They're in great mourning, and we need to complete this. So there's good news, there's bad news. The good news is police have done a tremendous job, and we've made tremendous progress. The bad news is we need more, and the difference is going to come from the community, and the community definitely has to make a choice. So appreciate you coming today, and Chief, and the work that the city's done, and I guess we'll open it up for questions. If there's no questions, that's okay.
Yeah, I have Can you just go through what the 3 cases are that you're talking about? Sorry, I don't work down here. So what?
Yeah, so there's 2 shootings, and we can provide the prior press releases, right, that we've given. If you, that might be easier to give you. Would you be comfortable with that? You want all the details that we've put out beforehand?
I mean, I heard you reference them briefly, but can you just say
the dates and...
Oh, I actually didn't write down the dates. Do you remember? Anybody remember off the top of their heads?
Yeah. The first of the 3 that we're discussing is May 30th. That was the Tyreek Gardner case from the 600 block of East Chestnut Street. The second is the Benjamin Ramos case. That was June 12th. And that's from the 900 block Fremont Street. And the most recent case is from June 16th. That's the Anthony Marshall case, and that's from the 600 block of Lafayette Street.
Thank you. Just follow up. I mean, why do you think you have this dynamic where people don't want to talk to you?
Look, there's all kinds of reasons. We can't, we'd be speculating for this particular case. What we've seen in the past is loyalty to the suspect, that they feel like they are friends with the suspect and the victim's no one to them, so what do they care? I mean, I had a homicide case many years ago in which a person flat out told me that she had seen the entire homicide unfold from beginning to end, but the victim was no one to her, and she was friends with the suspect, and she wasn't going to tell me what took place. You get some of that. You get some apathy. Some of it may be I think that's one of the things we're trying to address with having it done in Spanish as well. I think it's our responsibility to make the appeal to the public to get the information, so it's back in their court for that. So that's one of the reasons we're doing that. Maybe fear has been in the past a reason for some people not coming forward. Some people just don't want to get involved because it's not them. There's a laundry list of reasons. Again, people and their families, if they're talking to them about these cases, particularly with the juvenile one, there are a number of juveniles out on the street. They have to make a decision. This is the community they're going back into, that they're living in. So I don't know whether you want to add anything to that, Chief. We'd be speculating on the individual reasons for this case.
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much sums it up, but if we don't get the cooperation, the violence just continues. So we can't do this all by ourselves as law enforcement, so we need the public's cooperation and the community's cooperation. So it's, people have to make a choice what type of neighborhood they want to live in, what type of community they want to live in. And if they're happy being buttoned up in their house and not coming outside and not being part of their neighborhood, then what happens in that neighborhood is kind of on them. But we have parents who know, especially in the juvenile case with the stabbing of Benjamin Ramos. There are parents their kids told the parents. The parents know what happened, and instead of coming forward, they went out and they're hiding behind attorneys right now. And there's a mother out there that's grieving the loss of her 16-year-old son, and who just had a daughter graduate from McCaskey this year. She's grieving the loss of her brother, and it's actually what's come out of that is you have some juveniles in the community, some youth that want to organize and get together and either have a rally or have some type of organized effort to stem the violence, which is amazing. So if something good has come out of this, it's that. But we also want to bring the responsible party or parties to justice in each of these cases, and we can't do that without help from the community.
Can you talk? Sorry. Can you talk a little bit more about the appeal in Spanish? How are you going to do that? What does that look like?
Detective George Bonilla from my office is just going to come over, and he'll be here soon if he's not here, or he's out here, and we're going to kind of redo this thing and put it out on social media, and hopefully have it spread.
Have you ever done that before?
No, this was actually Janet Diaz talking to her from City Council. It's due to her suggestion. I thought it was a great suggestion, and we're going to do it. And I don't see any downside whatsoever. I mean, maybe we get nothing, but then we know we tried.
Do you think it could be a language barrier that people aren't hearing your plea?
I think it could be. I think it could be, an open line of communication with the police. It's two-way, and we want to make sure that we're communicating with people that may not speak English as their first language or at all. And they're part of this community too, and they want to be safe. So we want to make sure we're reaching as many people as possible. So it's a unique thing, but again, the credit for this, it was Janet Diaz's suggestion to me.
And then really you're kind of meeting them where they are. Do you think maybe those people will appreciate that and maybe they'll ingratiate them to talk to you? Does that have any impact on it?
I hope so.
Yeah, we hope so. I mean, at this point, it can't hurt us. It can only help us. So, and it's, we're going to be appealing not to, we're going to be appealing to other members of their family. So, more than likely, older members of the family that have a little bit more influence in the family dynamic, who might push them to talk to us.
And just logistically, so I understand, like some of what you've just said, you'll say it and then have him say it, and you'll post it.
Right, exactly. We felt it wouldn't flow well with this conference, slowing it down. So we're going to let you could stay. You're welcome to stay, but we're basically going to say the same thing, and it'll just take a little bit longer.
I have a question. The Tony Trellis case from April 27th, where does that investigation stand?
Yeah, so we're essentially wrapping up the investigation, and we're going to be meeting with the people involved, the family members, I believe next week. So we'll have an update for you on that.
Has anyone been charged?
No. So we'll have an update for you on that one coming forward. That's not in the category that we're talking about here of failure to cooperate or anything like that. That's a separate case, and we'll put something out publicly soon.
Do you have a ballpark number of how many non-violent or non-fatal crimes that you were talking about that are just, like you said, violent in nature?
The ones from this year, Kevin Winters?
I did not pull numbers, so I don't have those numbers readily available. But we've had, it'd be fair to say we've had several this year where we've had non-fatal injuries with uncooperative victims.
So what you're looking at essentially is 3 unrelated killings. I mean, it's not a turf war thing. There doesn't seem to be any gang connection or anything like that.
Well, okay. So there's a couple different things there.
Yeah.
There are 3 unrelated murders. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
there's no question about that. Homicides. They're not related. To say there's no gang connection, I think, would be inaccurate. The indications that we have for the juvenile stabbing would be that there were local street gangs involved in that one. But the risk is, and your question emphasizes the point we're trying to make, is the risk is there, with these not being held accountable without making the arrest, the risk is there will be retaliation, and there will be a cycle of violence for the fatal ones and the non-fatal ones if we don't solve these. If we can't bring them to justice, that person's out in the community. We know that for these cases, there are people in the community they know who did it, and there's a potential for revenge. There's a potential for more violence, and not just against that individual, but we've seen all too often innocent people get caught in a crossfire and sometimes lose their lives beyond just the retaliation. And that's the risk to the community. Again, the chief's talking about locking up your doors. Well, you better have bulletproof walls, and if that's the decision. So it's a good question. Anything else from anybody?
Maybe just a follow-up to you referenced it, that there are these teens coming from McCaskey to talk to you guys about how to stem the violence. He just talked to me about, I guess, the contradiction we have here. There's other kids who don't want to talk, but you do have these kids who are coming to you guys trying to do something about that too.
Yeah, there's a slight contradiction, but it's, so young people don't want to hear from us. They'd rather hear from, their peers. And it's, I think it's a great step forward to see young people taking the stand. Once, they see one of their own killed in an act of violence, that they're willing to step up and try and get the word out, and also create more sense of a community among young people, teenagers, especially in that school setting. Whether it's, you're talking about, an anti-bullying message or just an anti-violence message, I think it goes a long way. It's a huge win, I think, for all of us in the community as a whole, when you have kids that are willing to step up and take that approach.
Chief Heiser, have you adapted or modified anything in your policing over the past few weeks in response to violence?
I'm not going to go into anything that we might have done specifically. We have, there might be additional patrols that we put on the street in certain areas based on what we've seen. And the detectives that have been working each of these three homicides have been working nonstop ever since the incidents happened. So, and we all talked about how these happen in a short period of time. So imagine we have a detective division. It's all hands on deck when we do have a homicide. So the entire detective division has been working on each of these homicide cases as they happen. So they really haven't had a whole lot of downtime to think about anything else.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.